Until they're tested, and you still don't know, what your best is. You can't touch your dreams now if you don't take flight. Can you hear me now? Sometimes in this life you've got to fight for what's right. Come on and so on your own. Seek on the sky, seek on the sky, seek on the sky. Well, then you've got to see for yourself now, see for yourself now, see for yourself. If you want to, do you need to, I got something for everybody who needs to learn about harmony. Come my harmony. Come my harmonies. Please stand right here for me, please. Stand right here for me, please, my harmony. They work so hard, hey! Many a call. Ha. So few are chosen. The threads of life, children, they're all interwoven. So you can't touch a flower, no, without trouble in a star. Can you hear me now? Sometimes in this life, you've got to stand up straight and just say who you are. Come on and so on your own. No, you've got to seek on the sky, seek on the sky, seek on the sky. Well, you've got to see for you. If you want to learn how to fly, learn how to fly. Oh na na na, oh na na na, oh na 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 na, oh na na na, oh na na na, oh na 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 na. Come louder.
And Tobago. I do have an office here, I do some work here, and I live here, so don't be concerned about that. Don't be distracted by that. Today, I'm very happy that you all have come, because I want this to be a conversation with the population of Trinidad and Tobago. So it's a media interaction with a difference. In recent weeks and months, particularly in recent weeks, I have been inundated by a number of requests for interviews and comments and so on. And I've refrained from getting involved in the day-to-day operations, but I have been observing, researching, noticing, and reflecting. And a person with a unique perspective, I think I owe it to my fellow citizens to give my perspective on our current situation, particular, because it is of such grave importance to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I have heard it said on many occasions that we are so overly reliant on the energy sector that we seem to have failed as a nation to not have suitable alternatives for revenue generation in our country. But that's a conversation for a different day and for greater depth, reason, and analysis. What I'm concerned about today is the position that Trinidad and Tobago is in, has found itself in, and is digging deeper into that very many citizens still do not understand the depth of our circumstances. As the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who had to make the analysis in 2015 as to whether go as Trinidad and Tobago in the energy sector, and who spent the majority of his prioritization working on, with, and about our revenue stream from energy, I am alarmed at the position of Trinidad and Tobago today, as expressed by, or not expressed at all, by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Because one will have to come to the conclusion that the government is either ill-informed or the government is just reckless. For example, when the government of Trinidad and Tobago, through the Prime Minister, says we don't need Venezuelan gas, as a throwaway comment to try to explain her approach to governance in the context of our requirements and our vulnerabilities, that is a statement which has far-reaching consequences. I speak to you today. Trinidad and Tobago has proven reserves of gas in the order of about approximately 10 to 12 trillion cubic feet of gas. The people who invest in that business require, for new investment, gas for comfortably 20 or 25 years. Because if you don't have that amount of years of gas, it doesn't make sense to start a business that requires the kinds of volumes of gas that the Point Lisas type industries are. And add to that Atlantic LNG, which is just a processing of the gas from one form to another for transport. And thirdly, I want this country to know and to remember, as we boast, we are one of the few countries in the world where all our energy comes to us from natural gas. The electricity that we use from this bulb above your head, to the street lights, to the manufacturing floor, to the big industries and the industrial estate, we are all using electricity from gas. So bear that in mind. So unless we find significant to add to the proven gas reserves, we will be struggling to maintain even our current reduced levels of production and consequently revenues that go with it. So therefore, one, we said we wanted to remain in the business of hydrocarbons. Oil, as it's being reduced, we're still in it. Gas, as is now our main supplier of revenue, but we are cognizant of the fact that we do not have a huge gas reserve anymore. We have moved down our daily consumption from 4.3 billion cubic feet per day to now we are down at 2.6 and possibly could be falling. The trend is downwards. And of course, most importantly, we can't look at the reserves and say that we have 10 trillion cubic feet, so we can keep processing and manufacturing cubic feet. What we have to say is that if that is the reserve, we have to stop manufacturing, stop selling LNG at a point well below 1 or 2 TCF of gas. Because if we use up most of this gas or all of it in the manufacturing petrochemical sector and the LNG sector or both, and then we have to stop because we don't have enough. And we use up what is there for our electricity generation, it would mean that a crisis will arise somewhere down the road, not too far away from now, where gas for electricity for Trinidad and Tobago will become the issue. Not gas for LNG or gas for petrochemicals, it will be gas for electricity. And to ensure that we do not get to that situation, we have to make sure that we leave enough reserves in our formations to keep supplying electricity and in the future. Even as we say that we want to sell more as petrochemicals or we want to sell more as LNG. But if the circumstances turn out that we are not finding more gas to add to the reserves, to turn around our consumption, or even to maintain the low consumption or the lowered consumption, we always would want to know that we have gas for electricity. So don't believe that we can run down reserves from 10 TCF to 8 to 7 to 6 to 2 and still have point leases operating and still have Atlantic LNG operating. And that is why the PNM government, looking ahead for the future, medium to long term, saw that we had to look where gas is, not where proven reserves exist. And that is what drew your government under the PNM to focus on 2 areas of gas that was available as proven reserves. 1, the Loran Manatee field, and 2, the Venezuelan-owned Dragon field. So those 2 things, whatever we did there, however we managed our affairs, getting gas from those 2 proven sources in the context of priority of the government for this country's economic well-being. So we happen to have been in this situation at a time when outside of Trinidad and Tobago, there were forces acting in the geopolitical environment. In Washington, the amount of sanctions against Venezuela, the concern about Venezuela's friendship with countries outside of the hemisphere, concern for Washington, and the requirement for regime change to bring about good behavior in Venezuela happen to be at the same time that we are looking at our vulnerable future. I was the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015 when this confluence came together. We had an American government. As far as we are concerned, America is a friendly nation. We have deep and diplomacy. But over 200,000 people in America claim Trinidad and Tobago as home. They and their children. And of course, we, as the government of Trinidad and Tobago, have to be mindful of ensuring that what made us a nation, what kept us safe, is preserved. And what kept us safe? What kept us safe was our subscribing to the principles, the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, which provides protection for small nations like ours and large nations. And the fundamental principle that is that we do not subscribe to might is right, and power should be used against those who can't defend themselves. And in the UN Charter, you have the expectation that nations will not interfere in the business of other nations, will not threaten other nations, and will not intervene in the business of other nations, because that ruptures the peace. And in CARICOM, where we are a founding member, and in fact a leader in CARICOM, we took our protection by writing in support and subscribing to the region being a zone of peace. And that means nations interacting with nations should do so peacefully, and differences should be resolved by dialogue and conversation and diplomacy. That's why when the United States mobilized Canada, surprisingly, and the European Union, and declared that they were unhappy with the government of Venezuela, and they determined that there should be regime change in Venezuela, the PNM government at the time saw a great potential calamity for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. CARICOM saw that. We had an emergency CARICOM meeting when that matter resulted in the removal of diplomat, because we saw the trouble that has for all of us. How did CARICOM respond to that situation? CARICOM resorted to its fundamental principle that our governments, our nations, subscribe to what we call the Errol Barrow principle. Friend of all, satellite of none. If we put ourselves in that situation, then we can talk to and treat with anybody who our sovereignty allows us to do that. That's our right. We defended that right. So when the European Union gave Maduro 8 days to leave office, and Canada took the position that time for talking done, and the United States took the position that regime change is the objective, we realized that there was a crisis. Trinidad and Tobago led in CARICOM on this issue. At the emergency meeting of CARICOM, where we spoke to Washington, we spoke to Caracas, we gave our advice to the United States. They knew where we stood, but CARICOM sent a delegation to New York to meet the Secretary General of the United Nations on this issue. That delegation comprised the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and the Prime Minister of St. Kitts. The three of us traveled to the office of the Secretary General. And it was to make one point. We want, in this dire situation, that the purpose, that's our protection, because we cannot defend ourselves, our population, our economies in a situation if the United States and Europe and others who might be decide to create in our neighborhood, in our region, armed conflict. Because what we saw was a Venezuelan nation that was prepared to defend its sovereignty from outsiders who were dictating to Venezuela who should be their government, who should manage the resources, and how it should proceed. As we did that, the Secretary General Gutierrez, spoke publicly to the world Norway, South Africa, Mexico, and Uruguay joined the CARICOM in this requirement for protection and defense of the zone of peace. Uruguay organized a meeting in Montevideo. We all traveled to Montevideo, and we had serious confrontation with Europe as to what do you expect with any interest in this matter. Europe backed away and backed down on their position. Canada backed away from time for talk done. Norway took the initiative to generate the conversation and the dialogue and the diplomacy. And they met in Barbados, where Venezuela came to the meeting, CARICOM came to the meeting, and we had and that matter. Venezuela was still having some issues. CARICOM took the leadership then, and Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves brought Guyana and Venezuela to St. Vincent. And we all got there, giving dialogue and giving peace a chance. That's how it was. When Washington has a more aggressive posture to Venezuela, and rather than be more careful, be cognizant of how we manage ourselves before, look at our vulnerabilities. We have a Bajan Prime Minister who doesn't go to work, doesn't talk to the media, don't care who she fires, don't care who gets a job, to break international law according to American analysis from American parliamentarians, senators, and congressmen. They are the ones arguing now about whether the country is following international law. We listen to them. It's now 6 weeks that we have been in this situation where making statements about what the government is doing because it does not make sense to them, and their determination is that these actions are illegal. But strangely enough, European countries are in fact taking the same position on the legality of what's happening in the Caribbean right now. And of course, you have a number of persons in the know taking that position. But of course, Americans have made it quite clear. They are our friend, now we know that. They are our major trading partner, nation. We want to preserve our relationship with the United States, but we don't have to accept every policy that the United States executes, especially in international geopolitics. And we have to put our interests first. So how did we do that? A government that comes out and says, borrowing a statement from abroad, we are putting Trinidad and Tobago first. And how did the government do that? By asking for help. But we volunteered help to the United States military effort in the event that the United States military is engaged with Venezuela. Doesn't matter what for. It was cloaked in some comment about Guyana, but there was never an issue of Venezuela invading Guyana. That was a throwaway statement. But the gist of the statement was, in the event that the United States is military engaged with Venezuela, the Trinidad and Tobago stand with the United States. What that statement did, it dumped all the protection that we had of a nation confrontation on the horizon and taking a position with one of the potential combatants. From where I sit, from where I came, I could not believe that Trinidad and Tobago, after decades of advocating, supporting, and receiving the benefit of friends of all, satellite of none, and wanting the Charter of the United Nations to prevail in all circumstances to protect us, we decide that somehow we better off and have benefits to be had by taking a side. Let me tell you how far we went to this prior to what you all knew about. On the night when the news was that the United States has expelled the Venezuelan diplomats from the United States, we had a CARICOM meeting going on. It was virtual. I was at the tower at the 20,000 person. CARICOM took a decision in that discussion to put a CARICOM Prime Minister on the phone to talk directly to President Maduro and to tell him it matters not what the Americans have done with respect to your diplomats. Venezuela is not to expel American diplomats because you're only worsening the situation. If the Americans want to leave, let them leave on their own, but it must not be an expulsion by the government of Venezuela. How's CARICOM? And of course, we decided that coming to us at this point today, we started out saying that the fight was the most powerful military in the world deployed to fight drug dealers. Two gangs within, none of which are listed by the UN as being described by those who identify them as the source of our troubles. But of course, the gangs are named and people are killed on suspicion. Trinidad and Tobago comes out and says, we support that policy. We will add to that policy. We will defend that policy. Everybody else around the world who believe in the rule of law, saying that is not the policy that any democratic country should engage. And I will tell you something else too. As Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I can tell the country today that I am satisfied that our police service in Trinidad and Tobago and persons with access to the police service in Trinidad and Tobago were in fact conducting extrajudicial killings in Trinidad and Tobago. I happen to be satisfied that that was true. As Prime Minister, I was approached by the United States government, threatened with the implementation of the behavior of police officers in Trinidad and Tobago, who had been seen to have killed people under dubious circumstances. So here it is. The United States is prepared to confront Trinidad and Tobago about police killings in Trinidad and Tobago, extrajudicial killings, and to threaten to cut off from us association of our agencies, sharing information, and receiving any American help in the fight against crime. That's what I have to deal with. Tobago. But how could you be interested in it in that way? But today, the very said act is multiplied tenfold. And my country is out there saying, go full speed ahead, Trinidad and Tobago is behind you. And of course, after a few days, a few weeks, we're now able to say that having killed almost 100 people, only one name has surfaced so far as to the persons who have been involved in this so-called drug trafficking came into the public domain, not from those who are killing the suspects, but from the president of Colombia, who has identified a fisherman from Colombia, whose family identified a person who was killed and is today taking legal action against those who've killed him. That's the only name that's surfacing now. But more interestingly, While the chief secretary in Tobago is telling our fishermen, don't go further than 2 miles out in the ocean because something happening out there that's dangerous to you. While here in Trinidad, our fishermen in the south coast are free to go into the water. While anybody in the Caribbean in a pleasure craft is a target, possible target that could be wiped out. A minister of government in Trinidad and Tobago is able to say to the media that no citizen of Trinidad and Tobago has been involved in any of this matter. No fisherman of Trinidad and Tobago. How does he know that? How does this minister know that? We have got no names of anybody who's been killed out there by those who have killed them or by those who have provided the marsh to our government. Because I have to tell you something. The government of Trinidad and Tobago needs to answer, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago needs to answer to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the question is this: what did you agree to do with the Americans with respect to this matter of regime change in Venezuela? Are you or were you aware that is the Americans' intention to attack Venezuela, to conduct military action in Venezuela? Because I've heard the president saying that he has cleared the CIA to act inside of Venezuela. Those of us who grew up in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, we know what that means. Here in the Caribbean, we know the attempts by the CIA to do certain things in the Caribbean. You know, it's all our history. But when the president says that, I want to ask the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, in the discussions that you've had with the American agencies, are you aware of what their intention is? And if you are you prepared to share that with the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Because 2 Fridays ago, something was happening that threw this country into turmoil. Absolute panic in Trinidad and Tobago, because it was led to believe that an attack on Venezuela was imminent. The Prime Minister has nothing to say. She's in hiding under some rock somewhere or in a palace somewhere. But here it is. We are in turmoil over potential military action, and the Prime Minister has nothing to say. The minister, the less said, the better. And of course, every time we get something from the government, is a doubling down on this situation, cloaked in what the Americans say it's cloaked in. Initially, it was cloaked in fighting drug dealers. But it's interesting, those of us who have had the conversations with the leaders of various countries, our government is having us believe that what is happening, because the Prime Minister has said it over and over, implying that those of us who don't agree are in fact supporting criminals. I want to make it very clear. We have absolutely no sympathy for anybody who chooses a life in the drug trade. None. But we also maintain that in treating with them, it must be done within the position. And that is not a corollary of we supporting drug trade and drug dealers. Right? And of course, we now see a situation where all the information available to the world, to us as members of the United Nations, on the drug trade, does not tell us that Venezuela is a major source of cocaine or a major transshipment point. And they've told us where those sources are and where the major transshipment is. And we do know for a fact that we do have effects in Trinidad and Tobago from the drug trade. Nobody's saying no. But that does not nor encourage any other country so to do. If you follow the news coming out from the international circles, you will find that it is now quite clear, especially when the United States Secretary of Defense identify an operation which involves the most powerful arms and ammunition, and maybe the best trained military in the world in our backyard. What is called Southern Norway. I want to ask the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that is the backup to this. Did you know that this was to be the outcome of the decisions that you made with the United States? Did you make any decision with them? Did they share any information with you about this operation, which involves nuclear submarine, thousands of naval aircraft of leading edge technology, and of course, most importantly, the use of Trinidad and Tobago as a staging ground for this operation? Did you know that? Did you agree to that? Or is it just happening and unfolding that today the Venezuelans could be saying that we are using our country to facilitate an attack on Venezuela? How come Venezuela was never able to say that when they openly called for regime change and gave Maduro 8 days to leave office? How come they weren't able to say that? How come we were still able to go to Caracas and negotiate far-reaching agreements for our future, and to go to Washington and meet the people in Washington who are decision makers? How come? Is it that it just so happens that in the face of the American policy of attacking Venezuela, they just happen to have been on their way to Trinidad anyway? And what is worse, now that we are in this situation, the military confrontation is a distinct possibility. The government spokesperson in Trinidad and Tobago was saying that, well, the government had no choice because all of this U.S. presence and activity in Trinidad and Tobago and showing off their hardware in Trinidad and Tobago is something that Rowley signed under the Status of Forces Agreement. I want here this morning, for the benefit of every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, as the former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and Chairman of the National Security Council, and the person who sat and spoke with Americans throughout my term, that there's absolutely nothing in the Status of Forces Agreement to permit any commitment from Trinidad and Tobago to breach the UN Charter, to intervene militarily in any of our neighbors or anywhere in the world. Absolutely not so at all. Anybody from the government saying that, it is a lie. There's nothing in any document that I'm aware of which prevents the soft no to any request coming from any country if we believe that it jeopardizes our sovereignty or puts our vulnerability to the test. So let's get that very clear. If tomorrow there is a confrontation between Venezuela and the United States, and Trinidad and Tobago is seen entirely as a result of decisions taken and actions taken by the government of Trinidad and Tobago under the UNC, under the leadership of Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and I want to make that abundantly clear. Now let me take this population to our vulnerabilities. So we're bad. We're going to war. We want to change the government in Venezuela. You're asking the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, is Maduro the president of Venezuela? She wouldn't answer. That means she has another president. But that shouldn't surprise you, because at an earlier time when this thing started, the UNC was out front supporting President Guaido and calling for sanctions against the country's Prime Minister and the country's Minister of National Security and the country's Minister of Energy. The UNC was out front, lying on a state company, Paria, telling the Americans that Paria was providing fuel to Venezuela on the sly. The UNC was out there asking them to cancel the visas of government ministers of Trinidad and Tobago who were talking to Venezuela. So to not acknowledge the Venezuelan government, that is a fact as put there by the UNC in and out of government. But where does that put the people of Trinidad and Tobago? I told you a while ago that we are entirely dependent on gas for electricity. Well, let me go one step further. That gas that we are entirely dependent on, most of it comes from platforms offshore, just north of Venezuela, 60 miles out. I'm hoping that it does not come to this. I am hoping and praying that the United States military, the United States government, the United States Parliament stop short of generating a military confrontation through military physical action in our region, namely attacking Trinidad and Tobago's nearest neighbor, friendly neighbor. I am hoping it doesn't come to that. But if it does come to that, what does it mean for the people of Trinidad and Tobago? And the reason I'm asking that question is because that is the question that should have been asked by the government in the first place. Before you decide to play Sancho Panza to Don Quixote, you have to figure out where could that lead us. Well, some people believe that it leads us to get gas from Venezuela if there's a new government in Venezuela, and if that government is controlled by the Americans, we'll then get all our OFAC license and we'll get access to the gas field and so on and so on. That might be so. But for that to happen, there has to be an outcome from the military effort. Either that the show of force and the presence of Trinidad and Tobago as a staging jumping off point and all of that will frighten the Venezuelan government, and the government will run from Venezuela. That is what some people think. I saw persons abroad in authority saying Maduro's day is numbered because partly they'll pull a string or they'll give an order and Maduro will leave. I don't know that that is what the outcome is guaranteed to be. On the other hand, if Venezuela is attacked, Trinidad and Tobago has made itself a combatant in this matter. Look into these papers. You see the campaign from Venezuela accusing Trinidad and Tobago of facilitating an attack on its territory. You see the Prime Minister doubling down on offering Trinidad and Tobago to facilitate this, not staying in our lane under the UN Charter, under the CARICOM position of zone of peace. No, as a matter of fact, she has dismissed the whole concept of a zone of peace under the guise that we have crime in our country. There are other Caribbean countries that have crime equal to and more than Trinidad and Tobago, but they are rooted in the zone of peace, because zone of peace is about country to country. It's not about gangs inside your country and who invade whom and who murder who wife. That's not that at all. It's either a comprehensive misunderstanding of the whole concept of zone of peace, or you're playing smart with foolishness. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has been reckless in taking that position of dismissing our decades-old position to nuclear weapons passing through. So nuclear rods passing through to go to the reprocessing. We object to that because we said we don't want to be part of the nuclear age because we cannot protect ourselves from accidents or from violence involving nuclear. So come back to the gas. Here you had a government making huge headway in getting access from Venezuelan gas. Venezuela agreed to sell its gas in that way. Getting our manatee operations through Shell, where Venezuela agreed to cancel the unitization approach of 15 years and allow Trinidad and Tobago, with Shell as the operator, to go into the Loran manatee field and extract our manatee 27%. a government, a PNM government that got agreement from Venezuela to let BP go to Coquina, Mannequin. That's what the PNM government had in place. The UNC comes in and puts this in place for you. Let me tell you what's in place now. And I hope to God it doesn't happen. Because I give my life, my working life to this country. This is my children's country, my grandchildren's country. And I don't want it hurt. But let me tell you what the likelihood is going to be. If Venezuela is attacked. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago must know that, because this is not carnival. This is not a joke. It's all good for the Prime Minister, but our life is involved here now. Because Venezuela is taking the position that Trinidad and Tobago is using its territory voluntarily to facilitate an attack on Venezuela. War nowadays is not a set and build up with knife, bayonet on the end, and who have more bayonet and who been stronger, and like World War I. You don't have that. It's not even like World War II. This is 21, 25, 21st century. War now is you stay hundreds of miles away and you fire missiles that are accurate to within a few meters away. War nowadays is fought where you send 500 drones at a target. And I see in Europe, civilian targets are fair game. That's our world today. We are dependent on gas from platforms 60 miles out there. We don't have a navy that could protect us. We don't have a coast guard that could even stand out there to be present to hail anybody who's coming at us. That's a vulnerability of the worst kind. And if that becomes part of the proceedings, not by missiles being fired at us, not by bombs being fired at us, but just by a credible threat to those platforms, Trinidad and Tobago is now in a current against which we cannot swim. Because if a threat like that comes to us, a credible threat, that those platforms are in fact legitimate targets, those international companies will do one thing. They remove their staff from the platform. And once the staff comes off the platform, most of those platforms are manned. Once they come off the platform, it shuts down the gas supply to Trinidad and Tobago. And that shuts down Point Lisas. It shuts down the Atlantic LNG plant. And it shuts down every factory in Trinidad and Tobago, because it would have shut down TNT. And this bulb will not light, because we are so vulnerable. What the hell are we doing? Engaging ourselves and encouraging military action against our friendly, nearest friendly neighbor, even if we happen to agree what America is doing and so on. Where did you see Trinidad and Tobago's interests? Can you genuinely say that Trinidad and Tobago has made provision to protect itself from an attack to Venezuela? If Venezuela finds itself under attack, does that not make Trinidad and Tobago a legitimate target? Or have you come to the conclusion that, man, they ain't gonna do nothing? Is that so? You have jumped in this high-stake geopolitical issue, and you've taken a position as a combatant. I can tell you, long before this blew up, there were people who wanted to come and visit us with their military hardware, not the United States. But we knew what it would mean. And we said, no, your vessel is not welcome at this time. You wouldn't know that. The news didn't know that. We handle these things on diplomatic paper in confidentiality. That's what's done. Who wake up this woman to go and tell the world that if America, having declared drug dealers as narco-terrorists, not narco-traffickers, as narco-terrorists, And once they use the word terrorists, they are not authorized to use military against it. Because if they manage to kill every narco trafficker in Venezuela, the objective still remains. As a matter of fact, I was listening to the American president last night, this evening, answering questions from the American media, and they raised this same issue about the military being out there on the verge of military action against Venezuela for narco trafficking. And they pointed out that, you know, it may be that the hammer to kill the fly is not selling. The president said, it's not only that, it's also, we are down there also because Venezuela is a bad country. They opened their jails and their mental institutions and sent 25 million people, mad people and criminals, to America. And that is why the American military is here, to put an end to what Venezuela has done. And my prime minister is there saying on my behalf, go full speed ahead. I support your policy and you can count on us. My question today to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, what preparations have you made to protect us in the event that your offer is taken up or that Venezuela is attacked and Venezuela sees us, as they have said they see us, as a combatant in a military intervention against their territory? And Venezuela has given you their reasons as to why they are in this situation. I don't have to spell it out for you. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has a lot of questions to answer to the people of Trinidad and Tobago because we are at risk. We are at grave risk. And it's not even that, you know, it's not even that. What protection do we have from a cyber attack? Who's going to protect us? Is it that we are now laying down prostrate in front of somebody and say, we surrender to you, protect us from all evil? That is our foreign policy? That America will protect us from all these possibilities? Do we as a government, as a people, genuinely believe that those platforms out there, that the Americans will remain there with the submarine and the aircraft carrier and the planes and the helicopters to protect us from Venezuela for the next month, the next year? Because these things have a way of going on for years. Because when I went to the UN, when regime change had 8 days to go, that was when 2018. It takes years. Governments come and governments go in America and in Trinidad and Tobago. What should guide us is what has happened outside of the zone of peace of the Caribbean. See how wars have been fought out there. See how wars are being fought out there. And see what the possibility in the event of a conflagration here, what is in the making. Our Prime Minister must be the only person in the world led by her group, by the people elected, that I accept as the government of Trinidad and Tobago, who believe that all of this danger that you've been put in has something to do with fighting drugs, fighting drug dealers. Because if that is the case, an end might be in sight. And in sight, you think you bring the most powerful war machine ever in the history of mankind, the Gerald Ford. You think you bring that to a theater for sure? Or because somebody sell a cartoon of drugs and saying that, well, what you were doing has failed? It's the same thing saying, you are following the law and the law has failed. So we must use lawlessness. That's what they're saying. That's what our Prime Minister is saying before. You know, they're trying to give you the impression that it is something that they have done, that something that's happening, where we have American servicemen in Trinidad and Tobago, you know, training with our. That has always been in place. Always been in place. As a matter of fact, Southcom, which is the United States headquarters for military action and activity in the Southern Hemisphere, is based in Miami. We have an officer stationed there. We change people there all the time. The training, the polygraphing, the sharing of information between the SSA, and we have that in place. You may recall one of the largest drug hauls happened off the coast of Portugal a few years ago. The shipment was loaded here in Carnage. And Trinidad and Tobago authorities, we, in conjunction with our European partners in the United States, we watched it all the way across the Atlantic in the international ocean until it got into the territorial waters of a European nation, and the ship was arrested there, and the traffickers were arrested out there. The US Coast Guard, in collaboration with Caribbean nations, Coast Guard and other military, we share information with the Dutch, the French, the Germans, and the Canadians and the Americans. We are all in this together, fighting those who will poison our population. It was never a question of who have more might. Declare war on who they believe they don't like. It was never that. Trinidad and Tobago has sold its pig in a bad market. And right now, we are just hoping for the best. And today, I call on the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to come before the country, tell us what you have done, tell us what you have agreed to, tell us why you have abandoned what has worked, and tell us what protection you have in place for the people of Trinidad and Tobago in the event that there is physical confrontation between Venezuela and the United States. And as a citizen from I'm a lifelong member of the PNM party formed by Eric Williams in Trinidad and Tobago. I take the position that we are friends of all and satellite of none. To have made our nation a vassal state in this situation is absolutely unacceptable to me, and I expect it will be unacceptable to the PNM and all right-thinking citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I hope for the best. But this is not the time to have an absentee Prime Minister sending you tweets of nonsense and lies, and ministers. The Attorney General had a press conference last week, giving the impression that he understands what is going on, and he knows that something is going to happen, but he's not saying. What does he not share with you? And why the Attorney General is the spokesperson for this situation? This is a matter for the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Nobody else. Nobody else. And if the Prime Minister finds that it is too prickly or too hot to handle, that should tell you all how deep in trouble we are, because it can only get worse. It didn't have to be this. Trinidad and Tobago had a protected for something else. What that something else is, we don't know. Because if it never comes to regime change, what the outcome would be is that we would have created enmity in Venezuela, which threatens everything that we had in place to give us a future in the hydrocarbon business. Is that. If it comes to military action, what happens to us is as a result of what the Venezuelans do in response to the attack on them. Trinidad and Tobago is a tiny Caribbean nation in comparison to Cuba and Haiti and Santo Domingo and Jamaica. We are tiny. We are an island in the mouth of the Orinoco River. The Orinoco River runs out of Venezuela to us. We are surrounded by Venezuela land and sea. And if that is our position, it is even worse, where our lifeline, our heartbeat is out there in the ocean, exposed not only to to nature, but to a nation that believes that we are encouraging an attack on their territory, or that we have done so, and in the event of a confrontation, they will see us as a combatant. And that remains with the UNC. Today, as a former Prime Minister, I call on the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to cease and desist from exposing the future of our children and our grandchildren. I'm in a unique position. I'll tell you why. As Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, this issue came to me early in my tenure. And having to deal with all that I've said to you here this morning, I set out to make sure that I understood it and I dealt with those who are the players in it. I have sat down with the President of the United States. I have sat down with the President of China. I have sat down with the President of Iran. I have sat down with the Prime Minister of Canada. I have sat down with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I sat down with the President of Uruguay. And I maintain a foreign policy where my Minister Brown and Minister Moses, have carried a lot of it. And we understand it. The PNM understands it. And that is why today, when I see neophytes playing Bajan and putting Trinidad and Tobago at risk, I ask myself, who have they interacted with? What have they read? What do they understand of this situation other than what they might have heard on the news? So we just jumping along, hoping that if rain falls, we'll walk through the raindrops. That's where we are right now. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has given up all our protection and has taken a position of military outcome that is dangerous to Trinidad and Tobago, dangerous beyond comprehension. That is the issue in front of us today. And that is what should be the narrative of this country today. That is what should be the conversation in this country today, whether go Trinidad and Tobago in the event that Washington decides to attack Venezuela. Because Trinidad and Tobago has played a role already and put itself in a position in that matter. And it's not a good position. The second thing I want to mention very briefly, I want to alert the population to what is likely to happen. I see the government talking about reopening the refinery. We would be very happy if the refinery is reopened because we all want it to be reopened in operation. But as they speak about reopening the refinery, the conversation is very hush-hush. Nobody has said to us that they found somebody with a supply of crude. I want to let the population of Trinidad and Tobago be reminded the PNM government did not shut down the refinery because we didn't like Roger, or we didn't like the OWTU, or we didn't like refineries in general. It is the PNM that bought that refinery from Texaco. It is the PNM that kept it alive as our economic well-being. So don't talk nonsense about the PNM shut down the refinery because some other, you hear all kind of nonsense that fake oil and Rowley didn't want his partner Bash to get in trouble, so he shut down the refinery. That is the kind of nonsense that came from the Prime Minister in office today. That was her opposition story. We shut down the refinery because our local oil production was too low. We were buying oil to refine it. We were buying it at 100,000 barrels per day. It had to be paid for on many instances from the Treasury. And that is why today, as I speak to you, The Treasury is still servicing over $400 million from the Treasury that went to buy oil to be refined, and we were losing money by the billions of dollars. Those are the facts. So if we do not see in the statements coming to us from the government a credible supply of oil to make the refinery opening viable commercially, what you will be seeing is the government of the UNC attempting to attach barrier to the refinery as a project for reopening, where whoever gets that refinery or that arrangement, they get barrier. When we restructured PetroTrin, we created barrier as a state company, standalone state company, that bought and sold refined fuel, and therefore we gave them the local market and the regional market. This is the same UNC that created Section 34. It's the same UNC that created SIS as the biggest company in Trinidad and Tobago in government contracts. Barrier attached to some intention to reopen the refinery is not sufficient for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Because what they are planning to do is to attach barrier to Guara Carrier, give you that package, and everybody will be happy and hail. Long time we should have do this. We want the refinery open. And then once they do that, whoever is the commercial financier of that will very soon, without a supply of oil, shut off interest in the refinery and ball it again, if it ever is open at all. And they then end up with barrier. And barrier is a business that makes over $100 or even $200 million profit for the state. So the state loses that. But whoever gets it, they get the business of the local market supplying NP, and they get the business of buying and selling to the Caribbean region, what barrier is doing now. Understand that I want the population to understand that. You have given these people the option to do that, and they are actively preparing to do it. And I'm telling it up front so that you will know if it happens, or to let them know that we know what they're doing and ask them to turn their gaze somewhere else. Because when the fuel supply in this country falls into private hands and the owners of the supply are the ones who will determine the price that you pay for fuel, then you will know where barley grew. $1 off is quite okay, takes the pressure off some people, but that was part of our policy to reduce the subsidies that was suffocating the country. When you go to the IMF, as we are heading to the IMF, when we get there, as we will, that becomes another matter. But in the meantime, if barrier is allowed to fall into private or quasi-private hands, that is the outcome that's going to be. And the last point I want to make is on the question of the government's silence on what is happening at FCB. And I tell you that because I was there at the birth of FCB. FCB is one of the children of the PNM, created as a bank when other attempts at banking had failed. FCB was created by the PNM on a morning when NCB and Workers Bank failed, and the government had to intervene. And we took Workers Bank, we took NCB, and we took the penny bank money, and we created FCB. FCB has now become one of the outstanding successes in the public sector, in the state and the private sector, and in Trinidad and Tobago. The one statement that has come from the government so far relating to FCB is that they've appointed a chairman who they've also appointed as chairman of UDICOT. And he made a statement that in the face of some explosion in contracting that is to come, where we're going to build Dubai in Trinidad, that FCB and UDICOT will be the operating agencies and will fund this. I want to caution the country. I'm a geologist, if you will remember that, right? And in geology, there's a principle called uniformitarianism. The big word. It's very simple. It means if something happened before, it is likely to happen again. The UNC came into office and they sold the first set of shares at FCB, at IPO. Total scandal, total fiasco, resulting in a member of parliament having to resign from the parliament in the Senate. Shareholding that was blocked for the workers end up in the pocket of one individual. And the chairman was forced out in a public meeting, AGM of FCB. That is the UNC's record on FCB. Today, you're hearing from the government that FCB is to be the funder of this fancy. The shares of FCB has fallen from $42 to $31. You would have seen Anthony Wilson had a very brilliant article the other day in The Guardian, I think it was, on this issue. And that is an issue that must attract the attention of the government, because the government retains the majority shareholding, express an intention to sell more shares in FCB, and the shares are so collapsed as a result of some misbehavior of the government when they try to fire the leadership. But more importantly, who is driving down the shares of FCB when the bank's performance does not warrant that? I'm asking that question today. And I'm asking the government to tell the population, people who have bought shares in FCB, who see their worth plummeting, and the government offering to sell more shares. Question: will the government sell those shares when the market has so devalued the asset? And what is the government doing to return confidence to the people of this country, the investing population, who would want their shares to return and to improve? The investing population, who would know that if FCB and UDICA is to play this conflicted role in that program that they put out the other day, that if you are a shareholder, you are concerned about the shares you bought in FCB. And finally, how does the government intend to manage that, where FCB, like other local banks, are already deeply engaged in financing government operations? These are the issues in Trinidad and Tobago that are not being dealt with. To the extent that anything is coming to us from the government, it is, hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jump over the moon. That's what we're getting from them, right? But the serious stories, Prime Minister in hiding and nobody's answering, and the outcome could be quite disastrous for Trinidad and Tobago, quite disastrous. Our two main banks, they were doing well until this government started to operate. Both banks are now under pressure, largely because of the government's behavior. I could speak like this because I came into office and I met a former NAR Attorney General as the chairman of FCB. And we reappointed him over and over, and he did yeoman service, and he kept that confidence in that bank, and the bank grew and grew and grew under his stewardship, because we were quite happy. If Anthony Smart was the best chairman for FCB, then he has the position. I came into office and had to appoint a chairman of NP. And I appointed a chairman who was a UNC member of parliament. And he served without fuss and without more, running MP until last election day, when every chairman was threatened, get out, get out, get out. And today, we have in government, clearly, people who are putting our well-being at risk. That's what it is. The last thing I want to say is this. I'm a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. I was Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I retired from the office and the post of Prime Minister. I have not retired from being a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and I have not retired from public discourse. I would love to have done so, but I have not done so. If you have a few questions, I'll take a few questions now.
Dr. Rowley, just reading an article from Reuters, which is being carried in by other international media outlets. President Trump said on Sunday that the United States may open talks with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who faces escalating pressure from Washington amid a massive U.S. military budget in the Caribbean. And there's a quote from President Trump. The quote is, "We may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out." That is what President Trump, reporters having said. And he says that they, I guess, the Maduro regime or the Maduro government would like to talk in response.
Well, if it turns out that the difficulties are settled by talks, I would be the happiest person, and it would be the best thing for Trinidad and Tobago. That is what the zone of peace says. And if there are difficulties of any kind, that you deal with it by dialogue. Okay? But I just want to tell you, the source that you're quoting there, the statement that you're quoting there, up until 24 hours ago, the President of the United States was telling Republican members, do not vote for the discharge petition in the Epstein matter, right? People were literally cornered and threatened as to how they should vote. Just before I started here, I saw on my television where the same president tell all the Republicans to vote for the Epstein discharge petition. Understand? What he said is not what he said we're going to rely on, it's what is done. And we hope that what is done is what is said.
You expressed us very specific concerns with regard to now we have the U.S. carrier group in the region and so on, and all of the possibilities you have outlined that will happen if there is military conflict between the U.S. and Venezuela and how it impacts Trinidad and Tobago. In your discussions with the U.S. government when you were Prime Minister, was there any specific position being outlined by the government at the time, and you were speaking with them, the U.S. government that is, that they had this particular objective of military action, regime change, or anything of that nature?
Of course, because the requirement for regime change as a solution to people who had an issue with Venezuelan elections was public. That is why the European Union had said 8 days or else. That is why Canada had said time for talk done. And in that meeting, my question was to Canada, time for what? If time for talk done, then what time is it now for what? We didn't expect Canada to be a belligerent. We expected sound, judgment and support for the UN on this matter. And we had a lot of conversations with a lot of people in the United States. And we discussed, many people agreed with us. Let's take the Republicans, because we spoke with a number of Republicans. Many of them are from states with large agricultural holdings. And they had a special interest. But when we talked to them, we spoke to them about our position as a supplier of ammonia and other fertilizers, right? They have an interest in that, right? Because fertilizer is key in their economy. And when we told them about having spare capacity to produce more ammonia, that is what they were interested in with us. So we got them on board with that. And that's why they started to speak for us and with us, saying, let us get Trinidad and Tobago their gas, because we couldn't produce any more without more gas. And we spoke with the Democrats. I could tell you there was one Democrat who was resolutely opposed to doing anything whatsoever except expelling Maduro, on the grounds that they had, after the Barbados meeting, Maduro had agreed to do certain things and he didn't do it, and therefore expulsion from office is the outcome. And we kept saying, don't abandon the principle of dialogue. Right? Even if you're angry about that, let us stay the course. Right? What we have here now is an about turn to that position of that Democrat, who is a very interesting one. You might know who the person is, because he didn't want to hear anything. And then, of course, as fate would have it, Trinidad and Tobago people must know what is happening in America, because we have so much of an interest there. It is our major trading partner, but we will only have a trading partner if we have something to trade. If we end up without gas, we will not have petrochemicals to trade. We will not have LNG to trade. So America being our trading partner is linked to the fact that we have to have something to trade, and that something is gas. Unfortunately, we have a current Secretary of State. We know him very well. He was a candidate for elections of presidency before. He's well known to us. He's from the southern part of the United States, in Miami. We know the American politics of Florida and what it means for Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela and so on. We know that. So I am not surprised at the position of the Secretary of State, who wants to get certain things done that may have certain repercussions or benefits going down. We have to understand these things. And that's why I am shocked at the behavior of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who acted as someone who came from Mars, woke up from sleep, and was told to go and run 100 meters. Trinidad and Tobago was well positioned in this matter because it was all about patience. We, in fact, had access to the Speaker of the House. We had access to chairmen of committees, foreign committees, national security committees. As a matter of fact, when we closed this country for COVID in March of 2020, a few days later, had we not closed the country and COVID, a delegation, bipartisan delegation, was due to arrive in Trinidad and Tobago to spend 4 days. That had to be cancelled because we were closing our borders for COVID. So we've been there. But when we sat down to talk to the president of China, we understand China's position vis-a-vis Venezuela. Venezuela is not a little Caribbean island. Venezuela is a country with 30 million people and very powerful friends. That's another situation we said, we can just overrun you and take over your oil and give it to Trinidad and Tobago. Who can you sell that to? You all remember, you all are too young. I grew up in the age of the Vietnam War. And I was, as a student in school, I read everything that came to us. We didn't have cell phones and WhatsApp and so on. You had to read. And everything that came to you, every magazine, every this, every that. If today, as you look at the history of what happened in Vietnam and how Vietnam came into being and what it was and so on, you must, when you go home, go and read about that incident called the Gulf of Tonkin. Something happened in the Gulf of Tonkin. And as a result, we ended up with Vietnam. Millions of lives were lost as a result of an incident. Suppose there's an incident in the Caribbean Ocean now, in the Caribbean Sea or around us now, an incident. We have to learn from history. Huh? You ever heard of something called a false flag? We are at that stage now where that's the kind of thing that you have to look out for. Who said what, who did what, and what are the consequences? How do you respond to it? As a Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have the luxury of abandoning our neutrality. That's a singular point I want to make. And the UNC and the Prime Minister of the UNC, they have sacrificed our neutrality in matters of this nature. and they put us in a very, very vulnerable position. So vulnerable that if it comes to a shooting war off our coast, we are defenseless, and our economy is defenseless.
Dr. Rowley, you spoke about what you said was not in the Armed Forces Agreement with the U.S. that was signed or yes, we knew under the administration. Are you able to say anything about what would have been agreed to at that point in time?
It's a cooperation agreement. And our teams, the U.S. military, Trinidad military, we cooperate to be the best to serve our populations. It had nothing to do with fighting anybody else.
Dr. Rowley, during Polo Guardian Media, you said that nothing in the SOFA agreement would have permitted Trinidad and Tobago participating in regime change in Venezuela.
To not say no to it.
Right. But does it facilitate troops coming here and establishing a military base?
We have made no provision for any military base in Trinidad and Tobago, as I'm aware of. And troops coming here without a military base, American servicemen have been coming here on a regular basis, treating. You may recall during COVID that one of the American, when vaccines couldn't be had, we couldn't buy a vaccine. The first vaccines that came into this country from AstraZeneca, I think they were Pfizer vaccines that were available in America. We couldn't get any. And some Pfizer vaccines came to this country and they were given to the Defense Force. A UNC spokesperson went out and said that I had taken it and my family got it and the PNM, the usual bacchanal story. But those vaccines came in from a US department, military, and they were for the purpose of their colleagues in the Defense Force. That is the nature of the relationship that existed between us and exists between us and the military of our major trading partner. And I trust that it will remain that way. So American forces coming here is nothing new. But if at the time when America is threatening to invade Venezuela and to destroy Venezuela, the Americans ask us to do certain things, it falls within our sovereignty to say that is not in our interest and decline that. And the Americans would have understood it.
But do you think that given what has happened with this situation with the military operation in American Eastern here and so on, do you think, looking back on it, we should have been more cautious? Because at the time that we signed the agreement, the last signing of the agreement in December 2024, there was the tensions between America and Venezuela were very much alive. In fact, that was the problem we were facing with getting the Grand Deal executed. So that to have taken the position then, as we did in a press conference, and say that it has nothing to do with the conflict with Venezuela, was that not a very sort of naive position to take, given what was unfolding?
No, because the status of forces is not, one, it does not prevent the government of Trinidad and Tobago from exercising its full sovereignty. Secondly, the content of what is to be done to satisfy the status of forces has nothing to do with whether America wants a base in Trinidad and Tobago or any commitment so to supply. That was, when that story came up in 2024, I was very clear. I seem to recall speaking to the media on it, that you are misrepresenting something. Yes, we have so far. We've renewed it because it's worth renewing. It goes back to 2007, I think it was, right? And what was good in 2008, 2009, 2010, we've seen the need to do a little tweak with a little tweak here, but it does not give any We don't give up any ground of our sovereignty. We don't agree to do things that are unlawful. No. So when that was being said that this sofa is for an American base in Trinidad and Tobago, we had to correct it.
But it was said that the agreement was updated to align with new security needs.
Well, what are the new security needs? At the same time, we were looking to the Americans for some specific equipment, right? And specific training. I personally led a group here to the United States to get their cyber people, to know our cyber people, and to build up our cyber capacity because we were virtually naked. And in doing that, there is a benefit for Trinidad and Tobago and a benefit for the United States. And in talking to the United States, we always make the point that our security is important to you as well. Our economic health is important to you, because if our economy collapses, you are going to have some negative fallout coming your way. So renewing SOFA in 2024 created no condition that allowed us to not be able to take a position of our best interest if the United States decides to bring a task force and assault Venezuela. That's not in SOFA. And we're not the only country where there's a state of force agreement. That's a standard agreement between countries where you have a relationship between your militaries. And I said, we do have a relationship, and that relationship must continue. But that does not allow the government to go out there and drink bush tea and don't know the taste. Nobody could tell us that this happened. The American policy position that is happening now is as a result of having got a status of forces agreement with Trinidad and Tobago. If that is so, how then did they take that position in 2018 for regime change and regime change now? How come? It was done then when SOFA was in place. And at the time, the point in it, Maria, when we signed that agreement, show me where Venezuela said, as a result of the oil signing a SOFA with America, we now feel threatened and we are going to do this and we're going to do that. Tell me, did Venezuela react in that way? No, because Venezuela understood what SOFA is and did not feel any fear that Trinidad and Tobago was being facilitatory of an assault on Venezuela. And that's the way you have the understanding of it. If it was in fact a clear encouragement to the United States to use Trinidad and Tobago, then Venezuela would have objected. I am not aware that there was anything from Venezuela in response to our signing of the SOFA in 2024, because it was not meant to facilitate military action against Venezuela. So that is not part of the conversation now. People are trying to use it to explain what they have done, and I am objecting to that. Okay?
So, just wondering, when you speak as former Prime Minister, as you said,
I'm not only former Prime Minister, I speak as former Prime Minister who is prepared to protect the government that he led and the record of his tenure and the cabinet that he led.
So that was just to get clarification. When you speak, do you think that in any way takes away from the presence or the strength of any position or line by the opposition leader, the leader of the party to which you still belong?
No, as long as we're saying the same thing. If we're saying different things, well then you will have a problem. And if we're saying different things, it might be from different perspectives. I don't have to agree with everything that the PNM is doing in opposition now. And if they're going to government, I don't have to agree with everything they've done. I could see that they're doing something wrong and say so. But I am a life member of the PNM. The record will show that I served as Prime Minister with PNM membership, putting me in that office. The cabinet that I led was a PNM cabinet. And the fact that I'm not in office as Prime Minister doesn't make me any less PNM. And anybody who's prepared to challenge the record of the PNM government from 2015 September to the time I left office, expect that I will set the record straight if the record is being distorted.
Dr. Rowley, this may be your third media conference from this office, addressing us as a former Prime Minister. I wonder, to piggyback off of Joe's question, why not have this conversation via the office, the actual office of the opposition, or from the People's National Movement Valley House?
Because I don't want to operate as a functionary of the party at Balizé House or as an office holder. I want to operate separate and apart from, and it just so happens that I have the same issues that they have in the opposition, except that I am responsible for that cabinet that you're talking about. And I hope and I expect, and I've seen ministers of my cabinet taking issue, defending the stewardship of the cabinet, or raising issues pertinent to how the cabinet functions in public interest when we all together. Right? So that's how it goes. So I don't want to be influenced by. I'm not an echo chamber for the opposition members, right? Because I don't want to put myself in a position where everything they do, I have to agree with. Because a lot of what they have done, I may not agree with in matters of party. But that's for another day.
Can I just get back to SOFA? The fact is that SOFA mentioned narcotics and organized crime, transatlantic organized crime. And therefore, that is the language that the US government is using, as well as our own government, to allow them to be operating in this sphere.
There's no real. I understand what you're saying. There's no language that says that in your fight or your cooperation with states in the question of narcotics trafficking or human trafficking, that you are allowed to operate lawlessly. There's no language that says that. It might have been their intention to use it as cover for what they want to do, because I told you early on in this conversation that their objective is regime change.
Yeah, but they do not see that that could be used as a pretext.
But we cannot and we should not resile from cooperating with the United States in the fight against drug trafficking. There's no language, and I'm not taking a position that that is an objective that we should be against. I am saying that in doing so, with other ulterior motives and acting illegally under the guise of something called narco-terrorism, right? You're not fooling me. That's your policy, fine. That's your description, fine. That language there, you show me anywhere in that SOFA where it then says, as a result of this, and our agreement, that now the law doesn't matter. To the point where you can have a minister, a local minister here saying that, well, basically, they didn't kill no fishermen, so if they kill anybody else, it doesn't matter. And the law doesn't apply, and due process doesn't apply, and international law doesn't apply. From day one, in response to the regime change approach, CARICOM stood as a bulwark against it. And in talking to Venezuela about gas for Trinidad and Tobago, it wasn't only CARICOM. When I had to meet with the United States Vice President to gel this matter, I took with me the President of Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and two of the loudest voices that supported us in trying to get that carve out our OFAC license was the President of Guyana and the Prime Minister of Antigua. It was a CARICOM effort, right? It was a CARIFORUM effort. So where is this story coming from now suddenly that these things don't matter? Don't matter to the point where it can be said, we're not interested in the gas in Venezuela. And I'm saying to you, we're not only interested, we're dependent on it for our future. Because if we don't find gas in the not too distant future, we will have to start to cut back on our production to leave enough gas in the ground to keep TNTech going for a number of years. I mean, the tomfoolery is so far-reaching. I see the current government taking credit for the Exxon arrangement out in block 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 20, 23. I see them taking credit for that because Exxon has come. It is the PNM that brought Exxon into that situation after we had the tender process and nobody put in bids in the bid round for those blocks ever. Exxon suggested that, well, since nobody has put it in, would you talk to us about it? We went to cabinet. Cabinet gave the minister the authority to talk to Exxon because we didn't get any bids and we desperate for gas, everybody. And if Exxon is now saying they're interested in the ultra deep, bid round or no bid round, let's talk to them. And that is how cabinet approved that Exxon we amalgamate all those blocks, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and let Exxon have them because it's a narrow triangle, it's the top of the triangle, it's a narrow piece of land where our external offshore acreage come to an end between Barbados and Venezuela. It comes like a triangle like that. It gets narrow as you go to block 23, right? Block 23 is one block. 22 and 21, there are 2 blocks, then 3 blocks, the triangle going out there. And because of that, we said it's better to have one person having the whole thing, and we even have Barbados agreeing that when you do the seismic work, you don't get stuck with the border because it's that narrow, right? And put one person out there, and if the person is Exxon, good, because Exxon has the experience in the ultra deep. We got everything done, Exxon came on board, we had an election, the government changed. They met the ministry completing the production sharing contracts. I see big press conference and they taking credit for the fastest production sharing contract ever negotiated, and Exxon going to do this and Exxon going to do that. That is the work of the PNM, because the PNM is mortally afraid of Trinidad and Tobago running out of gas.
Dr. Rowley, you said you're a citizen and you painted a possibly very bleak future.
What did you said?
No, but I'm acknowledging that you're reminding us, the population, that you're not just a former prime minister, you're a citizen with a vested interest here. You have your grandchildren, your children here, your family here, and you don't want to see our country good. But given this potential bleak future, our possible inability to generate or produce electricity based on our fuels, possibly you spoke about missiles or vulnerable platforms, drones, this kind of thing. My question is, considering the state that the country is in right now, do you feel any regret stepping down when you did?
No. I don't feel indispensable. I have absolutely no regrets. As a matter of fact, I am quite happy that I was able to serve to the point where I could have stopped serving, and then I continue to have a life of some kind. It's never a question of I should have stayed there. It would have made no difference if the Americans really want to go into Venezuela. The difference would have been what position Trinidad and Tobago would have taken. That would have been the only difference. And I'm pretty sure it would have been a difference where we were not in a situation where we would have been seen to be a target. Thank you very much.
I want to piggyback a little on that question. When you announced the press conference, and there were a lot of comments on Facebook about your use of the term the office of the former prime minister. There was quite frankly, there's a lot of division. I could have said
no, it's my office. It's my office. You don't have to know about it. I could have said it in the living room of the prime minister. Yeah, I could have said that.
So, but is it? I mean, it's not.
I'm doing some. No, that's all right. I'm doing some work there. You're working at the offices downstairs. I'm doing some work there.
So, is it an official title in the agenda?
Oh, you mean the former prime minister? I can't change that. That is history. Yeah, because I have an office there. Yes, I have an office there. As a matter of fact, a lot of what I said here today, I'm writing at the moment because I have taken the position that notwithstanding what might or might not have happened, it is important for the population to know what decisions were made, why they were made, how they were made, and who they were made with. That, I think that's a valuable thing for the country, and I'm currently putting that together so at some time in the not too distant future, I'll be able to put it in the public domain, the record of the tenure that I came into this office of Prime Minister. It was a very, very interesting period. Some of the hardest decisions to take in this country were taken in my time. We had pandemic, we had gas collapse to $0.0 a barrel for oil, we had to restructure LNG, we had to keep every public servant in the job, right? We had COVID, you know, so I think I owe it to the citizens of this country. I might not owe it to those who think that they know everything already and that maybe I should just go and jump over a cliff. But I think there are enough people, and I could tell you, a lot of people reach out to me asking for answers to questions that I'm choosing not to answer in the public domain. But I think if I put it on paper, they can find the answer there and they can understand what is happening. But that's how history works for you. I read Dr. Williams' work. I read analyses of what happened with George Chambers. I was there with Basdio Pandey. I was there with A.N.R. Robinson. So I think we have to behave a little differently and benefit from that. And nobody is going to prevent me from having a say in this country if I choose to have one. Right? So, office of the former Prime Minister, don't let it bother you. I do have an office.
Power, feel the power, power. DJ,
touch it, bring it, baby. Touch it, bring it, baby. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Somebody touch me, somebody touch me, somebody touch my soul.
Yeah.
Somebody turn to me, Jesus. Somebody touch my soul. Somebody touch me, somebody touch me, somebody touch my soul.
who me?
While I was praying, turn to me, Jesus. Somebody touch my soul.
Life too sweet, I can't complain. The only constant is the change, and we go touch the road again.